Mum of 4 Peggy Hodgson had just put her daughter Janet to bed when she heard loud scraping sounds coming from the room the 11-year-old shared with her brother Johnny. The single mum ran upstairs to see what the kids were up to, but was stunned when she opened the door to see a heavy wooden dresser sliding unaided across the room, as the children watched aghast from their beds. Peggy pushed the chest back into place, but it moved again as soon as she let go, and the sounds of someone or something knocking frantically against the walls reverberated around the council house. Terrified and confused, she gathered 10-year-old Johnny, Janet and her other kids, 14-year-old Margaret and 7-year-old Billy, and fetched her neighbor for a second opinion. Later that night, on August 31, 1977, the police were called to 284 Green Street, in the London Borough of Enfield, where the first officer on the scene reported that she too had seen furniture dancing around the room as if carried by a ghost. It was a proper paranormal mystery. The next day the story was in the papers and the legend of the Enfield Poltergeist was born. Between the years of 1977 and 1979, the house remained the scene of strange goings-on, centered around sisters Janet and Margaret. Eerie banging sounds could be heard throughout the house, chairs tipped over without warning, and a deep, demonic voice started coming from Janet without any sign of the girl opening her mouth. "Just before I died, I went blind," the gravelly, threatening voice started out in one particularly distressing outburst from Janet's direction, although her lips never moved. "And then I had a hemorrhage and I fell asleep and I died in the chair in the corner downstairs." Reporters went on to capture the voice on tape, recording it telling interviewers to shut up and singing nursery rhymes, as well as alluding to a past life in the house. Ros Morris, then a reporter for BBC Radio, was among the many investigators dispatched to look into the reports of otherworldly horrors, and she would never forget what she uncovered. The journalist entered the house a skeptic, like many people who suspected that the story had been exaggerated or that the weirdness was the result of children playing an elaborate prank on their mother. But Ros left insistent that the case of the Enfield Poltergeist was more than a con or childish tricks, and she even returned to record the husky voice which followed Janet around for a BBC documentary on the haunting. Now, reflecting on the story 40 years later, reporter Ros told Sun Online, "I recorded the voices and a thumping, knocking noise on the walls. There was this very strange voice coming from near Janet. She wasn't moving her lips, but the voice would just appear, talking for hours. The voice would say a lot of childish stuff, swearing as well. It was very disturbing. Something strange was happening which just wasn't normal. Things only got weirder when Janet started having violent trances, and claims soon spread that the 11-year-old could levitate, supposedly hoisted into the air by a mischievous energy." A famous photo of Janet hovering in the middle of her bedroom was soon published as evidence, taken remotely by a camera set up in Janet's room by snapper Graham Morris. The spooked photographer said he knew something was up when he first opened the door to 284 Green Street to a barrage of marbles and Lego bricks, which he says were hurled by the same spirit which tormented Janet. And now he had what many believed was photo evidence. The snaps were stacked in a file bulging with over 2,000 separate reports of paranormal activity at the Enfield home, supplied by over 30 eyewitnesses to the unusual goings-on. The story of the Enfield Poltergeist has stuck with Ros ever since, and she appeared this week on a BBC Radio 4 show, The Reunion, to look back on the case. Photographer Graham appears on the show as well, having also experienced the strangeness of the whole saga firsthand. He says, "I stood in the gloom in the kitchen, and one by one they brought the children into the adults' arms, and the last one to come in was Janet. Suddenly things just took off and started flying around the room. Everyone wanted to see it. They came in as skeptics and left believing they had seen something. In the following months, things got even more sinister. Janet claimed that she was being used by the poltergeist, while the strange bangs and knocking sounds persisted. And then came the interview. Maurice Grosse, a former inventor and leading paranormal investigator, had based himself at the house and was joined in the investigation by poltergeist expert Guy Playfair, who sadly passed away at the weekend. While they were at the home, the researchers reported a series of curious whistling and barking noises coming from Janet's general direction, which were attributed to the mysterious spirit. And so it was decided that the TV cameras should be fired up for a world first, a recorded interview with the poltergeist, where Grosse tried to pin down who could be behind the hauntings which were gripping the nation. The investigator did his research, and tried to narrow down details about the ghost based on its responses to his questioning. He eventually deduced that the spirit must belong to 72-year-old Bill Wilkins, a man who had lived and died at the house decades earlier. Meanwhile, for Janet, being used as a conduit for a long-dead man seemed to be taking its toll. Her trances became more violent, and her mother allegedly once had to intervene when, during one disturbing episode, Janet wrapped herself in a curtain, the fabric tangled around her throat. The independent reports of strange goings-on blew the story into a national sensation, and the Enfield poltergeist has since been dramatized in TV series such as The Enfield Haunting and films like The Conjuring 2. But many skeptics have insisted right from the beginning that, like the exaggerated Hollywood retellings of the story, the case of the Enfield poltergeist is nothing more than fiction. At the time, a theory emerged that Mum Peggy was behind the whole thing as part of a ploy to get a better council house or in return for fame and money. But she never made a penny from recounting the story to reporters, and she never moved out of the house right up to her death in 2003. The idea was also floated by skeptics that Janet might be a ventriloquist and could have been behind the demonic voices heard by reporters. Others suggested that the most famous photo of Janet hovering above the ground in her bedroom showed nothing more sinister than a girl bouncing on her bed, triggering the motion camera which had been set up in her room. The skeptics' case was reinforced when the girls admitted to pranking some investigators by hiding their tape players and making odd noises as they poked around the family home. But Janet, now in her 50s, maintains that every other detail of the haunting, from the demonic voice to her sporadic levitation, was totally genuine. And today the house where the hauntings took place is owned by another family, although it remains the site of intense speculation about what really happened 40 years ago. Thank you very much for tuning into Spooky Realms. Please like and subscribe for more videos detailing the strange, the scary, and the downright terrifying world we live in.